Thank you very much, Tracy. Mr. Trevor Braffett, Deputy Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Mr. Juan Diego Alonso, Senior Country Officer of the World Bank, Cabinet colleagues, members of the World Bank team, other development partners, permanent secretaries, representatives from the private sector and civil society, members of the media, and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Hence, my written script ends. I decided this morning to deviate from what was prepared for me. Not because I don't support it, but I do. But I felt that this morning would be a good opportunity for me as the Minister of Finance and as the Prime Minister of the country to really articulate and continue to impound our policy positions. And I feel that maybe that this morning that would be something of more significance and make a greater contribution to the forum that's going to take place today. First of all, it is my opinion that growth, like many other animals in the world, is on the verge of extinction. In fact, if we look at St. Lucia, 3 of the last 4 years, we've had negative growth. And while I share Mr. Braffett's opinion that we're seeing semblance of growth coming out of the Caribbean, it clearly is not at the requisite level in order to be able to bring the change and to fundamentally change the quality of life for people in this region. And the question is why? Why have we not been able to see growth? And it's my opinion that in these small states that what we need to do is understand that macro is what the finish line is. Those are the numbers that we put for ourselves that we ultimately want to be able to achieve. But to achieve those things, we must think micro. It is not every business in the world that can succeed in St. Lucia in the context of our economies. We have high electricity rates. And unfortunately, every report that I see, that's not going to change. The best case that St. Lucia can look for in the area of electricity is electricity security, meaning that there may be a day in which we can produce more green energy, and that green energy would allow us now to be self-reliant because it's on the solar or whether it's on geothermal, but it's not going to fundamentally change the cost of electricity as we know it today. In fact, we have to depend on technology improvements, whether it be solar or wind, or the capacity to harness geothermal, that we potentially might see a reduction in the cost of electricity. So high electricity cost is a reality of what we have. Labor rates. Labor rates by the population or by the labor itself believe that their labor rate is too low. But relative to other developing countries in the world, we are high. And the reality is that I don't see wage rates going down. If anything, I see them going up. In terms of capacity, the physical capacity of the country to be able to develop economies of scales. So let's look at something simple, containers, and the cost of bringing a container from Miami to St. Lucia. When you look at the cost of around this region, St. Lucia, unfortunately, is high. And that's not driven by who the shippers are, that's driven by volume. And in part, by how we process those containers here in St. Lucia. So the question becomes, what is our capacity for growth? Because growth is what then improves the amount of capacity we have. And then it's when we can double the number of containers coming into St. Lucia that we can start seeing a cost per container going down. Water. I don't see the cost of water going down. In fact, we're being asked to spend a lot of money to dredge the dam, something that we had not anticipated. And in dredging the dam so far, we have no idea whether in fact that is viable. Because where the dam is built, unfortunately, because of climate change and Hurricane Thomas in particular, we have seen a substantial weakening of the banks of the dam. So again, Mother Nature will dictate how fast that the dam will continue to be silted. So what's the alternative? Is desal. So desalinization is not going to allow us to produce water at a cheaper rate. We would be lucky if desal allows us to continue to sell water at the current rate. And I say this because these are all important inputs into any form of industry that you're going to be involved in, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's agriculture, whether it's tourism, whether it's services. All these inputs compared. So these are the fixed things that we have. You know, when we look at the Singapore model, and we keep on quoting the Singapore model almost ad nauseum, almost as a flag in our face of look, somebody else has done it. In 1961, 97% of the people in Singapore were illiterate. And what they understood, which was the genius of Sir Arthur, was the value added of what? Labor. It's improving the productivity of that labor in order to make sure that there is more of those resources that are remaining here in St. Lucia. So how do we bring that added value? How do we utilize our labor force to its maximum ability in order for them to be able to enjoy increases in income and in essence, an improvement in their quality of life? But when we look at construction as an example, what's the added value to St. Lucia? Is there ever a time we believe that cement is going to be manufactured in St. Lucia? I don't think so. Do we see the metal and the steel being produced here? Do we see all the nuts and bolts ever being produced in St. Lucia? Even the truck and the equipment is imported. The fuel is imported. So the fundamental value added that we have is labor. So if we ever want to see a complete dismal failure of understanding that basic principle, is that we had a hotel development coming into St. Lucia, and more than 50% of the labor was imported. That's a real number. That tells us that we have failed. We have failed to prepare our people for what? The growth. So we can talk about policy and legislation and all these things all we want, but if we're not fundamentally ready to embrace that and to take advantage of it, it's going to go to naught. All we'll be doing is taking on debt and doing things here in order for other people to be able to benefit from St. Lucia's growth. So hopefully I've said to you that growth by itself is not the measurement of success. Because you can have growth, but if it doesn't resonate to the citizens of this country and to the sustainability of this country, we have nothing. We have nothing. And what it is to be St. Lucian will be diluted and lost. There are 4 words that are very, very important to me, and I want us to be able to embrace these words. And that everything that we do, we must reflect on these 4 words. This is the things that we must become sacred to us in analyzing anything that we're going to do. Capacity. When an idea is being floated, do we have the capacity to be able to absorb that? And capacity is not just physical, meaning do we have enough land space, do we have enough height, do we have enough beaches, do we have enough water, do we have enough electricity, do we have enough agriculture? It's not just limited to those things, it's the human capacity. Are we implementing a technology or an idea that is beyond the capacity of our people to be able to absorb? We have another example of that. Owen King Hospital. Isn't that sad? We've built a hospital in which, more than likely, the capacity to be able to man that fully and take advantage of it hasn't been developed to be simultaneously with the opening of the hospital. Do we have the financial capacity? So it's not just the human resource capacity, the physical capacity. Do we have the financial capacity to be able to absorb what is being promoted? And while you get into capacity, how do you influence capacity? You must focus on utilization. Because if you have the capacity, and you have a manufacturing plant in St. Lucia, and we have many, I know of no manufacturing plant in St. Lucia that currently runs 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. None. In fact, I know a couple that may run 2 shifts a day. Right? 2 shifts. So you cannot justify improving the capacity of the country until what you currently have that you're utilizing. So the question is, what are the things that are preventing the manufacturing plants from having 3 shifts a day? And why is that so important? Because utilization affects marginal cost, which is the next word, productivity. Utilization, if you focus on utilization and you improve utilization, it is going to make you more productive. Now, again, you see how capacity comes back in. Is it that one of the things that's preventing the plants from being able to get to full capacity is the fact that the consumer market here is not large enough to absorb what they can produce? So I would say to you that that's probably a good saying. That's a good assessment. So it means that you have to depend on what? Exports. The only way that you're going to get to full utilization is improve your exports. And how do you do that? You must become more competitive. Those are the 4 words: capacity, utilization, productivity, and competitiveness. And I can take it whether it's in the hotel sector, I can take it whether it's in the agricultural sector, I can take it whether it's in the service sector. It is the same 4 things. It's a very simple thing. Every single thing that you must do must determine, do we have the capacity? What are the constraints to that capacity? Can we reach full utilization? How do we improve the productivity? And how do we remain competitive? So, in my mind, this idea of public sector, private sector, I'm almost fighting with this because it almost suggests they're 2 different entities. And that it's them and us. And that must stop. Public sector must appreciate that in order to be able to pay for the services that we're providing and to be able to develop our country, we need a competitive and successful private sector. This idea of profit being a bad word, stop it. Profit is an indication of the viability and the sustainability of any investment. I know of no investment that is sustainable if it is not profitable. And profitable does not mean that it has a cash flow positive either. Profitability is that it has the ability to continue to reinvest and modernize and remain competitive moving forward. So the first thing that companies who are not cash flow positive cut is what? Training, reinvestment. And that is the kiss of death. Because you can survive a couple of years not doing that, but I can assure you there's no business that I know that can succeed indefinitely without the ability of being profitable. And profitable is not just a return of equity on its equity of its investors, but the ability to continue to remain competitive. So government, to me, the public service, their role and compliance is an important part of all of this. Because it is about how does enterprise interact with the individual citizen. Because a business can dominate the rights of a citizen. So that's the role of government, is to be the regulator, to ensure that growth is balanced and it's fair. And that while we give the rights of the private sector to be able to make certain decisions, it should never be to the detriment of the sustainability of the country or to the detriment of any citizen of our country. That's the role of government. It is to be the regulator. Is to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And once it's at regulator, it must also now, jointly with the public sector and the private sector, determine policy. And I make that distinction because many times I hear that the role of government is to be the policymaker and the regulator. No. Cannot make policy in isolation of the private sector. We heard some speakers talk about it today. The experiences of the business people who are out there every single day and can tell you the impact of a regulation, can tell you the impact of a process that we're using. There's no way that we're in our office, and I don't blame anybody being in an office because that's what your job is. But if you're not part of the process, if you're not experiencing it every single day, how are you going to know? So it takes both the regulator and the implementer collectively to be able to impact policy. The two most important things to me, because I hear this saying, public sector modernization. So I want to make it very clear. I've abandoned that word, because that's been a word that's been used too long. It's been bastardized. We've all been making the same promises. We are going to re-engineer the public service. That's what we're going to do. Okay, and it's time for that to take place. And the re-engineering doesn't mean the displacement of people. It's about putting them in a structure in which they can be more productive and take more pride and be more efficient. But what we need to do is to modernize our processes. And that's what this project is about, modernizing our processes. And there's two critical words when we're modernizing our processes, and those words are technology and innovation. There is only one St. Lucia. There's one St. Lucia. So the customizing of government, customizing of our economy, comes from whom? Everybody in this room, and more. That's the innovation. You have it. And we have to have a system and a process which allows those ideas to come out. So again, it's not about just identifying 51 things. Because the 51 things is a good beginning. But it's in the implementation of those 51 things. Because we can all put them on a piece of paper and feel very proud of ourselves. But it's the implementation. And we have to say, the fact that we've seen low growth, high levels of unemployment, high levels of debt, tells us that what we're doing is not working. Can anyone here say that the quality of life of St. Lucians over the last 10 years has improved? Can anybody look themselves in the mirror and say that? And that we're satisfied with the quality of life that we presently have? I don't think so. So a successful public sector reengineering requires us to question everything. Don't go to work every day and just keep doing the same thing, because everybody knows what the saying of that is, right? The definition of insanity. Question everything. We're the ones who make the rules. Everything is subject to change. If you can justify to make that change, justify it so we can change. If the law is not good, let's change it. If the process that we're using is not good and we have a better one, let's change it. And it shouldn't take 100 days. We have to figure out a way to make sure that it happens quicker than 100 days. At the end of this month, some of you may have heard that we have made it mandatory that all permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, ministers, chairmen of statutory bodies, and executive directors of statutory bodies are going to participate in compliance training. Compliance is such an important tool. because everybody must understand what their role is. If you're sitting on a board and the board is making decisions about creative working hours and who's being employed and everything else, that should signal to you something is wrong. It means you can't hold the professional staff accountable because the board has subsumed the role of the professional staff. So it's what is the role of a board? What is the role of a permanent secretary? We are accountable to the state for the resources that we have. And when you hire professional people, their job is to run and execute that program. And do not misquote me. If they can't do the job, then either they have to come with a new plan or they have to go. But the solution is not for the board to jump in and take control. And in fact, I see some boards, before even the professional staff have had a chance to even make a determination, they're already making decisions. Permanent secretaries. Permanent secretaries are the chief accounting officers. They're not technocrats. Their job is to understand what the policy of the government of the day is, know what the budget is, and ensure that those things are being implemented. But we have occasions where technocrats have made it into the position of a permanent secretary. And guess what? Start making decisions. So the technical staff are left behind. And I can tell you, I was a technical staff, and when my boss wanted to make the decision, I was the happiest person in the world, because if it didn't work, guess whose fault it was? His. Coordination. The reason why we've restructured the government the way it is two things. Is to send a message that government is too big. So the clusters that we have are to take critical areas and put them where they're now working as a team, and that now we have a coordinated path forward. So economic growth, all the critical ministries that are responsible for economic growth in this country are under one cluster. We'll have one permanent secretary. Each will have individual DPSs. We're now talking about creating a brand St. Lucia board. So all the entities that are responsible for exporting and are promoting St. Lucia brand will be together. So if the new tourism authority is going to a trade show, they're bringing the citizenship by investment program with them, bringing the programs under TIPA with them. If Pinnacle is going on a show, it's bringing the tourism authority with it. And then even with that level of coordination, understand this: if I'm going to be exporting bananas, my greatest marketing tool is for somebody to eat a banana in St. Lucia. Now, if I understand that in England, 85% of the tourists who come here come from England, and I actually have the information to tell you where those people actually live, it means now I can focus on what? Where the grocery stores are that they are. That's huge inside information. And we have to start seeing that level of coordination in what we're trying to achieve. So I want to end today. Tracy shared a quote for me, which I thought was very apropos, and thank you, Tracy, for that today. And the quote was from Abraham Lincoln. A man who saw the United States of America go through the abolition of slavery, the preservation of the Union through a civil war, and the modernization of an economy. I mean, he still stands out as a beacon of leadership in the world. And he said that commitment is what transforms a promise into reality. And I will say this to you. It doesn't matter the decisions that we're going to make. Those decisions are important. But the single most important decision that we make is the commitment to deliver. And you know, the Minister Joseph said something, that we want to be able to double the GDP in 10 years. It's not about politics, people. It's about survival. There's absolutely no way that St. Lucia can improve the quality of life of the individual citizens of this country with $1 billion GDP. Not going to happen. And if you know how to make that work, please come and see me right away, because I would love to know how to make that work. We've been running deficit governments consecutively. We're borrowing money to pay for over expenditure. We saw what the CDB report said, that we're collecting the highest as a percentage of GDP taxes than any other country in the Caribbean. In fact, we're almost as efficient as the most developed countries in the world, but the return on that investment is the lowest. Why? Because too much of that money is not just bad decisions. Let's stop the politics. There's some bad decisions. It's because too much of that money is going to pay for refinancing debt. And that debt is being generated, why? Because we're spending more money every year than we have. Look at the state of our roads, look at the state of our schools, look at the state of our general infrastructure, look at the amount of money we're putting into training of our civil service. Because remember what I said, when a business is not profitable, the first thing it's going to cut is what? The reinvestment into its plant and the training of its people. That's exactly what has happened to St. Lucia. Because we're not profitable enough. And there's only two ways you can get to profitability, is by increasing the amount of revenue you're generating or to cut the cost. And if you think cutting the cost is the solution, when you go to education and you go to health, 85% of the cost is what? Salaries. The policemen. Who wants to be in that room to go and tell a teacher she's not getting paid enough money? Who wants to be in that room to go and tell a nurse that she's not being paid enough money? And which one of you is going to go and tell the policeman that he's not getting paid enough money? So cutting the cost is not the solution. The only way we can achieve this is by growing our economy. And the good news is the capacity for growth is tremendous. Tourism, the Caribbean collectively is only 1.5% of tourism. We got 150,000 Americans a year. Jamaica gets 750,000 Americans from the tri-state alone. And remember, Jamaica included is only 1.5% of world tourism. If we can make ourselves a low taxation destination, we can attract businesses here. We can be a hub. We've seen that our IBCs in the region have been incredibly successful. Let us build on those successes. So I'm asking you that while you are here today, it is important. The decisions and the dialogue that you're going to have is important. And that the public sector people and the private sector people who are here, we are all citizens of St. Lucia first. That in order to create the greatest amount of efficiency, we know that the private sector is much better and much more efficient at implementation. And because we are paid for by the citizens, we have a responsibility and we're better placed to ensure that we protect the citizens of this country. But collectively, we must sit down together because we both pay the price for failure. The private sector companies will struggle if in fact we don't improve the ability for us to compete. The government will fail if its private sector is not succeeding. If we're not generating jobs, if we're not generating consumption, if we're not being innovative, if we're not remaining competitive, if we don't have people to reinvest and take advantage of the opportunities we have in this country, we will fail. So I'm asking you to be somber because this is serious business. This is not a forum where we're just coming here to talk. And I'm asking you to take some of the key values that are being said to us. We must embrace change and recognize that change is necessary if we're going to succeed. I thank you very, very much.